Hello. So let's resume the meeting. And next agenda is a community consultation about policy documentation by Adam.
Thank you, Masato. For those who are regular attendees and followers of the policy SIG, you'll know that I've had an ongoing project for a couple of years now to consolidate and streamline the APNIC policy documents. At our last meeting, we published a single document. So we went from 7 policy documents down to 1 document, but of course that 1 document is very big now. And this is version 2, so I published this morning a draft for editorial comment feedback of a new version of the same document that's been re-edited a little bit to remove some redundancies. So particularly in the IPv4, IPv6 and AS number policy documents, there was a lot of duplicated information. And while I was able to remove some of that in the first edit from 6 months ago, there were some areas that were a little conflicting, because as each of those documents had been drafted and changed over time, they were edited a little slightly differently, and there was some kind of conflicting information in them. And so I didn't want to do that all in one big hit, so we went from 7 documents down to 1 very large 14,000 word document. And to make that was a substantial change in itself, and to do these edits I thought was probably a little bit too much. So I've waited 6 months, and we're all kind of familiar with that document. It's APNIC 127 version 1, and now the new draft document for comment is version 2. And as it says there, it removes redundancy in those areas. There's a couple of other areas that I just want to run through today, because they involve larger changes, I guess. One of them is the definition of multi-homing. So multi-homing is relevant in V4 and V6 policy because you can get an assignment, you can request an assignment of V4 and V6 space based on the fact that you're multi-homing, and you need your own addresses to do that. And multi-homing is obviously also relevant in the AS number policy. And as I say, each of those kind of had a different definition. And in the AS number policy, the definition of multi-homed was kind of 2-factored. A multi-homed AS is one which is connected to more than one other autonomous system. An AS also qualifies as multi-home if it's connected to a public internet exchange point. So both of those kind of make sense, right? That's so the references here, if I can point, at the top here, refer to the original policy document before I merged them. And so that's relevant to every slide on this slide deck, if you want to go back and see where I'm getting my references from. So in IPv4 policy, which was actually kind of already split in 2, and it's a long story, the definition was quite a bit different. An organisation is considered to be multi-homed if its network receives full-time connectivity from more than one ISP and has one or more routing prefix announced by at least 2 of its ISPs. So that's in the old V4 document. In the V6 document, there was no definition at all. However, it kind of has a definition buried in the eligibility criteria, which is very similar to the V4 one. And so in version 1 of our policy manual, it's kind of still messy like that. And the solution to do that is to put a new definition of multi-homing based on RFC 1930, and my proposal is multi-homing is a way of connecting an organisation's network to the public internet through more than one autonomous system. And so that's a proposed new definition of multi-homing. The other area that kind of is a significant change is registration of contact persons. Now, again, that was different depending on which document you were looking at, which kind of seems odd, right? There's a lot of words here, but basically in the V4 policy, it said you must register admin C and tech C, and it has said that for many, many, many years. And the bottom point here, in addition, it's mandatory to register an IRT object, which is more of a new one. So it was must register admin C and tech C, and it describes what those mean there, and an IRT object is mandatory. AS policy is the same. Must register admin C, tech C, and IRT is mandatory. V6, no mention of admin C or tech C. So it wasn't a requirement, but I'm pretty sure in the WHOIS it's a requirement. You can't kind of register your resources without doing that. And so this kind of policy is out of space, out of step with operational practice and community expectations, I guess. So my solution in redrafting to version 2 of the policy document is to apply that requirement for tech C and admin C to IPv6 address blocks, which is pretty, I hope that's pretty kind of self-evident that that's the solution for that. So all of this is on the website, and if you go to the URL there, it has a little bit more detail and information about what I changed. It also has what is a new thing, and I should have put a slide in here to show. We've got a red-lined kind of markup approach now, so you can actually scroll through the document and see what's been added and removed, and hopefully that makes it a bit easier for everyone. The instructions are on the website, but please email any comments to policy@apnic.net and do that by the 10th of October, if you could please. Oh, I jumped out. But yes, that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Actually, it takes a couple of years, but finally we got final draft, and thank you very much for your effort. Is there any comment or question? Okay, if not, thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you.
And next one is Prop 114, and since Aftab cannot attend this meeting, he will present this one and also next one remotely. Oh, sorry, I forget one more informational infomercial presentation. I'm very sorry. The next one is IP. Yeah, I know. Next one is IPv4 mining strategic reserves by Jim Cowie. Sorry, Jim. No.
Thanks. It is a little strange. I appreciate the invitation to speak. This is actually the first time I've ventured to an APNIC meeting. I'm the chief scientist at Dyn, an internet performance company, but more specifically, I lead up the Dyn Research Group, which is a specific group within Dyn that has the mandate to reach out to not only our customers, but everybody else in the world who might be able to use internet performance and internet performance measurement specifically to help build a better internet. So I'm not a policy guy, and I apologize for that. But I do a lot of measurement. And I think, in some sense, it's as Jeff said, we do measurement because we want to see whether policy worked. We want to model what will happen when policy changes. And what I'm going to speak about today is a sign of that, in the sense that the role of policy in this region and in every other region is about to change really substantially. We're in a liminal period between the old way of people getting addresses and some new ways that people will get addresses. And it's one of the biggest transitions in our history, and we're here to measure it and find out how that's going. So I gave a talk at RIPE earlier in the spring on the IPv4 exhaustion situation, the emerging transfer market, and all the things that can go wrong in BGP routing. And immediately, I think we kicked up a dust storm, and people started also studying this here and there, and Jeff started studying it. And as soon as I read his blog from August, the APNIC blog, I realized that I was in real trouble, because a lot of what he had covered I had hoped to show you here. But he did it, of course, better than I would have done it. He plucked all the low-hanging and high-hanging fruit from that tree. So what I'm going to show you today is leaves and bark. No, it's not that bad. And here's the story, and he's told it well. Go to his blog. I even put a screenshot of his blog on my first slide. The basic story, I think, is very familiar, that you have a system of inbound transfer and intra-region transfer, which, as he said, is not huge, but it is hundreds of participants, and the rate has doubled this year compared to last year. And it's clear that something is happening, right? Exhaustion is here. The markets have started up. And in some sense, the way that this is changing is going to create great opportunities for people to grow the internet. It's just going to be a little different. And specifically, when these transfers are happening, there is opportunity for chaos. And I'm going to show you some examples of some really funky things that can happen when space is being transferred from one holder to another instead of just being given out. Okay? So when APNIC, when a registry thinks of space allocation, it's all about giving it out. In my mind, and in the mind of a lot of people in the world, I think that's kind of history, right? We already believe we're not going to be able to come to you for space. It's kind of over. We know we're going to have to go to the market. So just to frame it, you know that this is very different things, right? Space that's been allocated is not the same as space that's been routed. Space that's been routed is not the same as space that's being used. And the fact that those three levels are not cleanly mapped to one another, not cleanly measured, in some cases not even cleanly measurable, is one of the confusing things here, which is preventing the market from being efficient in some sense. It's very hard to do price discovery if you can't accurately assess what the actual demand is for the commodity or what the supply is. We do know that there's a lot more demand than supply. That's been the case forever. But how would you predict the forward pricing curve for IPv4 addresses? It has this sort of bimodal outcome. Either IPv4 addresses are about to become monotonically more valuable and expensive over time because they're scarce and there isn't any more of it, or they're about to become valueless and zero value because IPv6 has succeeded. So those are obviously mutually exclusive, and I know really smart people who I respect who believe one or the other of those, which means that the outcome here is probably based on some probabilistic thing that we are unable to predict with accuracy now. But let's take a look at the data. So here I did something similar to what Jeff has done, and I'm only looking at the routing table. I'm not looking at the database. I'm not looking at the registry. I'm just looking at what we geolocate to the region for each country, and what's actually in use. And so this is going to be a conservative estimate of what's in the table. And over time it grows. And you can see that the growth has leveled out, right? The growth rate has started to slow, which is at odds with the allocation rate, right? Because people were scrambling to get the last bits out of the pool. It went into the routing table, in part because people had to justify getting the last little bits of space. They had to justify that the space they had was being used, so they would just put it in the routing table. So this is one of those policy things that has perhaps unanticipated outcomes down the road. That because there is more space that has been put in the routing table quickly of necessity for policy, it's also available later to be reclaimed and mined. And I'll show you there are some analogies you can think of in terms of, there are people, professional companies that go into old landfills and dig them up and reclaim all the metals. They reclaim the plastics. They reclaim all the fractions of the landfill, the garbage, that is suddenly economically valuable enough to dig out of the ground. And I think the routing table, I'm not saying that the BGP routing table is a big pile of garbage, but it contains value that has to be mined out of it. And that's what we're going to be doing as long as we are still playing the V4 game. So there's surplus in the ground to be mined, to be extracted. You can think of it like a natural resource. And you can think by analogy to petroleum, right? Petroleum in the ground, we all know, is a finite commodity. There is no more. It's being made, but on a geologic timescale, and our civilization will quickly use it all. So we all know it's going away. We all know there isn't any more being made, and we need huge amounts of it every year. So why is the price of oil currently $40 a barrel and not $10,000 a barrel? That's kind of weird, right? Why is the price of oil not monotonically increasing every day? Well, it's because people respond to that demand. They respond to the moment-to-moment scarcity with the availability of different products, right? Not all petroleum in the ground is the same. You get the light sweet crude from Saudi Arabia, which is cheap to extract and use. You've got this heavy tarry stuff from the Venezuelan Orinoco fields, which is heavy and has to be cracked. You've got bituminous stuff that's locked up in Alberta in tar sands that takes new technologies like this one that can extract it and bring it to market, but it's expensive. You use huge amounts of energy to do that. So depending on the availability of all these different pools and the current demand, people invent new technologies and they go aggressively after reclaiming old things. They put them back in the market, and then the price falls. And that's, in some sense, why the price can cycle over time, even though it's all going away someday. We all know we have to go to V6. We all know there isn't any more V4. But we don't know what the appropriate price level should be today, let alone tomorrow, for an address. So what are we going to do? Well, people are going to solve this problem without us having any say in it, really. They're going to go to the market. They're going to identify the cheapest fractions of the V4 pool to bring to market and extract it, and they're going to use it. And the irony here is if we put very strict policy requirements on space, and I'm not saying it's a good or bad idea, but to make sure space doesn't has to settle for 24 months or 12 months before it can go off, or putting other requirements in place, we should recognize that those policy decisions are raising the price of accessing that pool of addresses. And people will go to the cheapest form of address space that will be portable and usable. So here's some anecdotes from the RIPE experience. And just quickly, because there's a different experience in the RIPE region for various reasons that we'll take a look at. As these markets heat up, we knew there were going to be problems. We just didn't know how they were going to manifest. So if you have talked to people who run IPv4 brokerages who are brokering these transfers, you know that addresses are not like selling a car. Right? If you sell your car, it's a pretty clear procedure for that. There's a legal title, you hand it over, but more than handing over the title, you actually hand over the keys and they drive it away. And once they've driven your car away, you are unable to drive your own car, which this seems kind of obvious, right? You can't drive the car you sold yesterday. You can't still use it if you really need it to go to the mall. But in V4 space, you can. You can sell your car and keep driving it. This is a Romanian Dacia car, which is a great car. And this one's been repurposed to participate in a road rally in Morocco. So we chose this one for a reason. Here's the problem. This is a sensitive clicker. This is what actually happened in the RIPE space. We saw Romania, in terms of its IPv4 outline in the routing table, start to shrink. Right? The number of addresses routed by Romanian providers for Romanians that you trace route to them and it ends up in Romania starts to decline. And half the blocks in late 2014 through early 2015 that were officially transferred and listed at RIPE were actually from Romania. In fact, they were from a few providers who had figured this out with the help of some good brokers. And so the concentration was very high, and it actually had this visible impact on the evolution of their space. And where did it go? Well, they had a buyer. So we had the Middle Eastern region, which is part of RIPE, needs address space. came to the table a little late, needed more space than they have, had surplus cash to buy the space, and boom, it went. And so at one point, we saw 1/3 of all of Saudi Arabia's prefixes, mostly smaller ones, so not 1/3 of the space, but 1/3 of the routing table entries were actually ones that had been Romanian a quarter before. It's like you dug up Romania and took it to the Middle East and sort of spread it out. So Iran, Syria, the UAE, all of these folks were buying these blocks on the market. And so I'll show just an example here of what could have gone wrong, what did go wrong during one of these transfers. So in October 2014, here's a /17, which is brokered and sold from the Romanians to the Iranians. And the mobile communication company of Iran buys this /17. They need it desperately. And they immediately began advertising it. You can see on the plot, this is the record of, we collect BGP route updates and synthesize them so that we have a picture of the evolution of the routing table going back to about 2002. And so at this moment in time, it hands over. The Iranian mobile provider is ready to go. They've got that space. It's ready to drive away. And they drive it away. And then we realize, or they realize, that actually level 3 is still announcing more specific pieces of that block, which was sold. The Romanians were no longer announcing it, fair enough, but for historical reasons, somebody else was announcing little /21s carved out of it, and had been since the early 2012. Okay, so imagine what happens. So if you tried to get to a site or a mobile user, a handset that was numbered out of that /17 but had the bad luck to be in the /22 or the /21 that was transferred, that was inside the transferred 17, it wouldn't go there. It would black hole. It would go off to the level 3, wherever that was ending up. And there was some real frustration. And it was compounded by the fact that because it was Iranian space, they're kind of used to the internet being problematic and blocked and slow anyway. And so without actually digging into the routing table, it would not have been clear what the impairment was. So who's blocking us? Well, it's just BGP blocking you. So the problem is, what do you do? Well, the Iranians are smart, and they went in and said, well, we'll just re-announce some more specifics. And so they put even more specifics into the global routing table to pull the traffic back to them. So now we have the purchaser fighting with somebody who didn't even used to own his car. Maybe they were just a friend who drove it around occasionally, and they're still fighting for control of this vehicle. This is the side effect of a market in which terms and conditions for address block transfers do not contain clear routability responsibility. And probably that has to fall on the seller, who has the due diligence duty of warrantying that the space that they are selling you is clean and can be transferred because it's not being used by them or by anybody else. So the good news is, when I was asked to come here and talk about this subject to APNIC, I dug into the table and I said, I'll find another one just like that. I'll find which country in this region is shrinking, and I'll find blocks that have been transferred, and transfers have gone horribly wrong. And I didn't find it. And it was at that point I realized this presentation was going to be in real trouble, because I want to see people fighting over resources so I can make a great presentation. But we have a theory about why this is. Obviously, the RIPE region and the APNIC region are very different places. For one thing, it's interesting that APNIC has had access to the inter-region transfer market for some time, whereas RIPE is just getting around to thinking about that. And more importantly, things that are transferred inside APNIC space and into APNIC space have a higher probability of being unused. Okay? The problem with that Romanian prefix was people had been using it for a long time. When you use a network for a long time, it develops, there's machines all over the place with that config, right? There's domains that have been registered in that correspond to IP addresses in that range. There's all this sort of legacy cruft that builds up. And in a fresh prefix, you don't have that. So here are the statistics. We took a look at how all of the things that were transferred within APNIC and within RIPE, because there are good official lists, had been routed every day for the last 5 years. Going back to, I think we did back to 2010. And we looked at every day in our historical routing tables. And we took a look and we said, how recently was it before the moment of transfer that the space had been routed? You'd prefer if it hadn't been routed ever. That would be optimal, but at least not recently. And you'll see that the answer is the same if you look at the day of transfer. On the day of transfer for both regions, about 25%, something like that, about a quarter of them are still being routed. And that's okay, because a lot of these transfers may be, some of them, as Jeff identified, are actually within the same organization. They've used the transfer registry to identify the fact that they're going from one place to another place. But if you go out on the curve, you see that when you look at a year, APNIC prefixes are about twice as likely not to have been routed in the last year as a right-transferred prefix. That's a cultural difference or a difference caused by the scarcity of resource, we don't know. But that's how it stacks up. This is the most significant difference, quantifiable difference between the regions that I could find that might explain why we don't see a lot of failed transfer in the APNIC region. And I said why, right? You want space that's sort of like, okay, it's not petroleum anymore, now it's timber. It's old growth forest. It's trees that have been there for a long time and they've never been used by anybody else before. You cut them down and use them. Because conflicting sequential use is the largest source of inadvertent BGP hijacking. So I will show one example from this region to show kind of the thought process. So here's a /22. This is an old growth prefix. This thing was allocated before the turn of the century, and it was in somebody's back pocket, and they didn't route it. For 16 years. It exists, it's never in the table. Okay, well, that couldn't last. So somebody pulls out the chainsaw and cuts this old growth tree down and ships it to Asia. Now it's actually already in Asia because this is in the ARIN registry, but they called it PAC-IN, so it's original Indian space, but somehow it was originally registered with ARIN because that's how it was in the old days. So it's not going very far, but on 16 March of this year, this is what happened. It's been transferred. Great. And that was March. Here's in May. A couple months later, SoftLayer fires it right up, says, yep, here's that /22. Its debut moment is in India with SoftLayer, and it's being used. And the story, hopefully the story ends there. Well, okay, so a couple months later, another hosting provider comes along in July and carves a piece out of it, and they put 1/24 into the table. It's the third of the four in that block. 50 days later, and we looked at that and go, this data center owner is not SoftLayer. It's Control S. And so here's the map. We look at this, and one of the techniques that we use is we look at what we call the transit tree, the list of providers upstream who are getting money to route this prefix. And we systematically compare transit for the more specific to the transit for the less specific to try to figure out, is it the same guy or not? And in this case, it's not. So again, we get kind of worried at this point. But we don't see any continuing action. We don't see anybody trying to overwhelm it or advertise the same /24. They seem to coexist peacefully. And in fact, if you look in the routing table, that's how they are right now, coexisting happily. So I have to assume that those are the same people in some sense, that Octane Marketing, I was like a transactional email provider or something, has decided that they're going to do SoftLayer and they're going to do some Control S hosting for the India presence. And if we use our tools and we look at how some of their websites are hosted, yeah, it looks kind of consistent. This rung our alarm bells initially, but ultimately there's nothing here to really say that there's a problem. But this is an illustration of how complex this is going to get. It's good to just say, oh, we need to measure, we need to figure out how transfers are working. But imagine replicating this analysis as this transfer market grows to thousands of these a year. For anybody who wants to figure this out, this is going to be quite a challenge. So again, why did this fell through my algorithms and said, oh, here's one to put in the slides. A recent transfer from the ARIN region to the APNIC region. Origin ASs were different for the big and the small. There were sequential expressions, meaning they didn't all happen on the same day. They didn't have the same transit providers, although they did have very similar geography. You know, this is a template for what it's going to look like when people really start to do space leasing, right? Where people take these more specifics and just lease them out to a friend with a different AS and don't bother putting anything in the database. That's what it would look like. So I'm going to wrap, because I think I took too much time and really want to talk about policy. But this is my message. This is why I go out on the road and talk to folks. This is sort of a buyer beware story, that when people do inbound transfer of space, you've got to research the historical routing of the network. And the seller should do this, and the broker should do this. And they should both be offering warranties about the historical performance, the routability of the space, going back, as far as allocation. You also need to look at DNS, because people can have domain names that attract all kinds of weird traffic to space that you're inheriting, and you can't necessarily see that unless you have that mapping. Once you have taken delivery of a transferred prefix, it's really mandatory to set up some aggressive routing alarming on that, so that you know if there's anybody else out there from the old days, or frankly, there are drive-by IP squatting incidents like this all the time that have nothing to do with the transfer market. If anybody else starts using your space, you need to know. And the fact that you've got a transferred block as opposed to a freshly allocated block means that you are at a higher risk of that kind of takeover of your space. Again, APNIC, from what I see, is a little more fortunate than other regions, because the things that are being transferred here, initially at least, are more likely to be old growth. They're more likely to not have been successfully routed for quite a long time. And if you were a broker, and I think we have some brokers here at the meeting, and I love the industry, and I'm not denigrating their practices, and in fact, the ones I've talked to say that this is in process, this is being done now. Clean routing assertions, maybe even clawbacks, to make sure that if you buy something that you cannot successfully use because it's already being routed by the seller or by the seller's cousin or something, that you get your money back. These are the sorts of things that pop up in markets. And the registries are transitioning. This is the moment of transition from being the distributor of space to being the manager, potentially, of transactions between people rather than between a registry and a consumer. And we are all interested in figuring out how you guys will address that. So I will end it there. I will just make one more pitch. I don't know if there's anybody left here from the APTLD meeting. Dyn Research does lots of work like this, using internet measurement to help people get stuff done and to talk about their work. We're doing really interesting things now with some of the CCTLD operators in Africa, for example, where we use internet measurement, performance and routing to study local versus global hosting, for example. The impacts of high latency connections to American content that by all accounts should be hosted closer to home. If any of that sounds interesting to you, please find me, and I can fill you in on some of the projects we've got going. All right, you've been patient. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Is there any comment or questions?
Ajay Kumar from IRIN. So we also observed that sometimes we delegate some IP addresses to our affiliates, and that IP address has been announced by some other party in the RADB database.
Yeah.
So we face some problem to remove from RADB. We have to take long follow-up with RADB team. So as a community, I would like to request anyone, should we have any procedure as we follow the RIR model, how to solve this problem?
Yeah, and this is not a question that I can answer. It's something probably a lot of folks here would like a shot at answering. There is something unusual there philosophically about how centrally important it is that your database be the source of route filtering In the RIPE region, it's done really tight and well, and I think European providers are pretty down with they're settled with the fact that you have to have your registry stuff sorted out. Nobody's going to do end runs around the process to get space from on the black market or whatever, because they're going to have trouble getting it routed. At the same time, those are artificial increases in the cost of getting space and expanding the internet, and in some sense, you are driving people to go offshore with other ASs in other regions with other kinds of space from other kinds of people. That's a question above my pay grade, but tough one.
Izumi.
Hi, Izumi from APNIC. So I'm trying to maybe not fully answer, but like partially share the experience in APNIC. So we don't actually check the routing of the transferred address space, but when we actually reallocate the returned address space, we actually make sure that currently this space is not routed, so that the new recipient of this allocated space can actually use this address space. And if we actually find any prefix being announced, we actually contact the upstream, and we actually point to our whois saying that this is now allocated to this organization, so could you please take this down? And it usually works that given that the registry ourselves actually say that currently this organization is the authentic holder of address space. For transfer, we actually leave it to the responsibility of the buyer to make this judgment. So I would actually encourage that in addition to the seller, if you're a buyer, make sure that you check this in advance, and so that it's also your responsibility when you're buying your address space. And then for the operators in general, if you see the address space that is being routed by somebody who's not registered as the holder of the space, then I suppose it's the operator's responsibility not to route the space that is not registered in the whois. So as Internet Registry, we try to provide the log of address space being transferred, so that it's clear that maybe this space has been used or allocated by a particular organization, but people can check the record of whether this new user or new recipient of address space is legitimate and recognized by APNIC. I believe similar initiative is taken at least by APNIC, and I don't know about other RIRs, but so I think this is able to check, operators are able to check who the authentic holder of the address space is.
Yep. So I agree with all of that, and perhaps also noting, so there's official registration, and then there's sort of the experience. And you mentioned that it's important at the time of transfer to just check the table, make sure it's not being routed. It's also important to look historically, though, because there's another incident that we saw in the RIPE region where, and I won't name them, but one of the hosting companies who's also brokering transfers of space, took a European prefix, routed it for a while, stopped routing it, waited, transferred it to a Palestinian provider who routed it. Time passed. And then the original transferor accidentally put it back in the table. And because they were in Amsterdam, and because the other guys were not, they were chosen by a large fraction of the global population as the legitimate home for that prefix. Completely inadvertent, it was just red faces. But it was not the sort of thing that was evident at the moment of transfer. It was an event whose probability went up because it had previously been routed. And we don't know. There's no firm answer about how long a quarantine should be in place. You should take this thing out of circulation for 3 months, before it comes back in the table and it can be transferred. There's no hard and fast rule. And frankly, we don't have enough transfer data yet to start to calibrate what that policy might need to be.
David.
Thank you. Hi, I'm David Huberman from Microsoft. I wanted to respond to my friend from Ireland. You mentioned the RADB. One of the problems that we have seen is clear over the last 25 years is as operators, we make routing decisions based on what are in these IRRs, these routing arbiters. RADB, RIPE-DB, APNIC DB. We require route objects. We require AS sets. We require these things to be registered. But the unfortunate truth is you and I can pay $250 US right now and register any route object we want into RADB. It's not ours, but they just take our money and trust us to put whatever we want in. And then we make decisions about that. RIPE-DB is even worse because anybody can assert a route object in RADB if they can simply pass authorization. So, in addition to what's been discussed today about being very, very careful about what you buy when you're buying IP addresses, be very judicious. Do not trust the sellers. Do not trust the brokers. Do your own due diligence about chain of custody and routing. As a community, as an operator community, we have to continue to improve the way we make decisions and be very careful what data sources we trust. We've all had the problem you've experienced, my friend, you know?
Oh, Izumi, you have further comment?
Yes, I completely agree with.
One second, because we are running out of time, so let me close my microphone at this point. So Izumi and NJ, and that's all. Okay.
Okay, so I completely agree with the earlier comment made from the gentleman. So there's inconsistency between what's registered in IRR and the allocation data in registry. So whenever we actually find such cases, we actually contact those database people, or we also contact the upstream ISP that this data is not always consistent with the registered data. So maybe there's more work that is needed in ensuring this kind of inconsistencies. And feel free to report to us, JPNIC, in case there are any inconsistencies. We're willing to help. And I trust maybe this is similar to APNIC as well.
AJ.
Ajay Kumar from IRIN. Thank you very much for accepting the problem. So as a community, should we have any solution? We are following INA, then RIR, then NIR model. Some other party, private party who is taking the money and giving a route object or some authentication, and some operators are believing on that. So what should be the policy or practice follow here as a community to demotivate that practice? Thank you.
That's a question for this community, but I offer whatever help we can offer in terms of the measurement to support that analysis. There's no good solution, right? It's a distributed database. You don't want an authoritative database for the planet that says who can route space and who can't, probably, which means it's going to end up being something that we as a community work out in a multi-stakeholder way, and regions and coordinated and so forth. Because we don't want any single person in control of that decision of what is okay to route and what is not okay to route worldwide. So that's going to mean a lot of manpower, because I think I would love to hear Jeff's prediction with his curves of what year more people come to the transfer market for their IPv4 space than come to the RIRs. I think it's sooner than we think.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
AJ, I agree that it is a point, but we are responsible for policy in this region, but it cannot be resolved by the policy, only the policy in this region, right? Because it is a global issue. Anyway, thank you very much for giving very good presentation. Thanks. Then now let's go to our official proposal, and first one is a Prop 114, and after we'll present this one and next one.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello, Aftab, can you hear me? It's Adam. We need you to mute the Adobe Connect or turn it off and just use the WebEx. Hello, Aftab, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello, Aftab?
Yes.
Ooh.
Sorry about the delay, everyone. It always works in the tea break, right?
Oh. Hello.
Oh. After, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you speak a little bit loud?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
That sounds better. And I heard some claps as well. That's much better. Okay. And can you see me now?
One second. Okay, now everybody can see your face. Okay, so please present Prop 114 as first.
Okay, first of all, everybody, please accept my apologies for not being there personally, and accept apologies from Skeeve as well, because he is not well and just came back from hospital last night. So, but he is available online to answer any questions if you have any. Hopefully, you should have. So, start with the Prop 114 version 3, which we presented last time during Fukuoka, Apricot, and most of the people agreed with the last version, but because of the procedure of the policy 6, we couldn't get the consensus at the very last moment, and that's why the proposal was sent to the mailing list, and then we got a couple of support messages, and then nothing happened for next 3 months. So everybody was quiet until last 2 weeks, and then we got a couple of more support messages, and that's it, nothing else. So let's start with the discussion. So what's the problem? The problem is currently APNIC policy states that to get an ASN, you have to satisfy 2 things. First is you have to be multi-homed, and you have to have a clear defined single routing policy to justify your requirement. As we have said before, this is a bit ambiguous, and that's why people just give wrong information, misleading information, or they simply just put any ASN or any contact information just to get the resources. And this is just to prove that why they have to provide this information, because as part of the resource application form on the APNIC website, you have to give 2 peering network details. So you have to provide ASN, you have to provide contact name, email, and phone number. So either you are multi-home, so that is easy, you can provide that information. If you are not multi-home, and if you are just planning to multi-home, then it is somehow difficult to have this information during the filling of this form. But somehow everyone just get the ASN, so something is wrong here. So what's the objective of this policy? In order to make the policy guidelines simpler, we are proposing to modify the text describing the eligibility criteria for ASN assignment by providing alternate criteria. Currently, as we believe that there are certain guidelines, and those guidelines are strictly followed by APNIC hostmasters to evaluate the criteria, so they should be updated as well. What's the situation in other RIRs? Alan, it is not mandatory, but optional to be multi-home in order to get an ASN. Right policy to remove multi-homing requirement is currently in discussion for quite a long time. And the current phase ended in 19th May. I have no idea what happened after that. And then the LACNIC, it's not mandatory to be multi-home. If you are just interconnected, that's fine. APNIC is mandatory to be multi-home in order to get an ASN. That's the situation. So what we are proposing? We are proposing that an organization is eligible for an assignment of ASN if they are currently multi-home. If you are currently multi-home, that's not an issue. You'll get an ASN. Or you have previously allocated provider-independent address space from APNIC, and you are intending to multi-home in the future. This means that you don't have to provide the 2 peer network information from the day one. You can provide the details of one network, which of course you have to, but not for the other one as mandatory. Advantages, by adding the additional criteria of guidelines managed by APNIC Secretariat, this would enable the Secretariat to make decisions based on common or rare use cases, but that may still be a valid request. Disadvantages, as it was perceived last time as well, that it will give unnecessary advantages to people to get ASN, and it will be quite easy for everybody to just get it, given the relative ease of obtaining ASN after this process, which we totally disagree. Impact on APNIC, no impact on existing resource holders, of course. And that's it.
Thank you, Aftab. Is there comment or questions? Also, please say you support or oppose to this proposal. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in the support of this proposal, but
Sorry, please say your name.
yeah, my name is Shiva Upadhyay, and I'm in the support of this proposal. But the thing is that there's
I
no.
can't hear you.
Hello.
Just hold on, I can't hear you.
Aftab, are you there?
Yeah, I'm very much here, but I can't hear you.
Hello. Now you
Okay.
can hear us?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, let's continue.
I'm in the support of this proposal, but the thing is that there is no policy in place in APNIC or at a regional level. If someone takes ASN number and if it proposed like I'm going to use in 6 months or 1 year, we propose that thing. But there's no policy if he doesn't use, if there is no, if he not fulfill his promise or whatever he proposed. So is there any policy? As per my understanding, there's no policy in place by using that policy we can take back the resources from the end users. If he pays money on the time, so likewise for IPv4 also, some people take IPv4 resource and only uses 4 or 5 resources, but there's no policy of taking back those resources, not consuming whole /21 or /22 block at their level, I guess.
Okay. Thank you for your question and thank you for your support. I'm glad that you asked this question. If you can just recall the Jeff Houston presentation in the morning, I just want to repeat some stats from that. From the last /8 address pool of 103/8, around 3,051 people got that /22 from the last /8.
Yeah.
And out of those addresses, 1.5 million addresses are still unadvertised. So if you just divide it with the 1024, that's /22, it means around 1,400 members are not advertising their prefixes at all. So some of them must have got the ASN as well. So once during the application process, they must have provided the information of and justification that why they are getting the prefixes and why they are getting the ASN. And of course, that was total misleading information, and they didn't fulfill their promise. So this loophole is there.
Yeah.
And I believe this is not the responsibility of APNIC up till now to tackle that. It is based on trust that you will fulfill your promise. What we are trying to do is we are just trying to get rid of something which is quite obvious, that you can have only one peer at one time to start with. Not necessarily you have to have multi-home, but there is a clear indication that even the current policy is failing miserably. So APNIC has to perform policing as well. I'm not sure if it is under if it is part of their rule book or not, but it is something which is happening at the moment. Yes, our policy will not solve it, but yes, it will give at least some benefit to those who are willing to give correct information and they don't have to falsify. Thank you.
I just want to add, likewise, these are the critical resources, and yeah, we very much aware, like IPv4 and ASN numbers, what happened. We predicted, likewise, for IPv4 before 10 or 20 years back, this will fulfill the criteria of whole world, but you know the situation what is right now. So what I'm suggesting is, before going for this policy, I really support, because it will give it will really support who are really willing to use ASN number and providing fake information so that they can easily operate their networks. But my suggestion is that before going for this policy, if we think or to resolve this issue, if they are not going, because they are not using sometimes, and many times, likewise, you also mentioned and showed the data. So I guess my suggestion is we have to look into this before going for this policy.
Okay, something to know, something to discuss with the community, and let's see how it turns out. Thank you for raising this concern.
Thank you.
I totally support that.
Thank you.
Okay, David.
Thank you, David Huberman from Microsoft. Aftab, thank you for doing this work. I strongly support this proposal as is. I hope we will move this forward with consensus as is. This proposal nicely harmonizes and modernizes AS number requests and criteria, similar to what is happening in RIPE, similar to what is happening in LACNIC, and similar to what already exists in ARIN. Thank you.
Gaurav.
Gaurav Upadhyay, Alignment Networks. I support this proposal, and actually I'd like to point out to Shiva that getting an address from APNIC does not require you to announce it on the internet, right? That's never been a requirement. That address allocation must be visible on the public internet. The requirement is there that you are going to use it, and your internet might be different from my internet. So, you know, there's never been any requirement that, you know, address space allocated is not in use, and that's why that thing about taking back and all of that is not going to be workable unless we go and start going back to the fundamental RIR policy and say your address must be visible on the internet, right? Otherwise that's not relevant. So this policy as is supported by me. Thank you.
Thank you. AJ.
Ajay Kumar from IRIN. Thank you, Aftab, for putting up the policy and giving the detailed presentation. I fully support this proposal as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further comment or question? If not, I'd like to ask consensus about problem 14. And as usual, you have 5 options. First one is strongly support, and second is support, third is neutral, fourth is oppose, and last one is strongly oppose. So if you are attending from AP Legion, please raise your hand on these options. Otherwise, it means you are sleeping in this session, right? Okay? So, Adam, is comfort ready? Yeah, this time I'd like to use comfort as first and ask raising your hand as second. It takes some time? Yes, it takes some time. Okay, let me change. So let me ask raising your hand at first. So, oh, it's already switched? Okay, so have you already registered to confer? It only shows 5 opinions right now. Oh, it's pretty slow. Interesting. Okay, anyway, let me ask, raising your hand while waiting, you're entering your opinion over the comfort. If you strongly support Prop 114, please raise your hand like now. Okay, thank you. If you support Prop 114, please raise your hand now. Okay, thank you. If you are neutral, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks. If you oppose to this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, nobody. If you strongly oppose to this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, no oppose and no strong oppose. Then, oh, interesting. Oh, sorry, I forget to check remote participants. So, Skeeve, are you strongly what? I assume you are strongly support because you are one of authors. Of course, support. Okay. Okay, then conference result is okay. This one. Okay, so it seems there is no objections. This proposal. So I would like to say this proposal reached to consensus and send it to AMM in this afternoon. Craig, sorry, I don't have the script this time. But thank you very much, Aftab.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for supporting this proposal.
And let's go to next proposal.
Yep.
Aftab, go ahead.
Okay, so the next proposal is Prop 113, version 3, modification in the IPv4 eligibility criteria. Again, the philosophy against this proposal is the same as the ASN allocation. What's the problem? The current APNIC IPv4 delegation policy defines multiple eligibility criteria. Applicants must meet one criteria at least to be eligible to receive IPv4 resources. And that criteria dictates that an organization is eligible if it is currently multi-homed with provider-based addresses or demonstrate a plan to multi-home within 1 month. That is section 3.3, which is now has been updated by APNIC 127 version 2 document, which has become section 6 point something. So because of that update, I have to update the policy document, but that is only because APNIC 127 has been updated. Again, this policy implies that multi-homing is mandatory, even if there is no use case for the applicant to be a multi-home from the day one. And even if there is only one upstream provider they want to connect with, but still they have to provide the details for again, as I mentioned in the previous policy, that you have to provide the details for your two upstreams during the application form. Again, organizations are getting IPv4 address space by providing false information from the very beginning, and the only reason we are doing this policy is to just get rid of the falsification point and give them opportunity to provide correct data. This is the snapshot of the resource application. If you are doing it for your own network, if you are an enterprise, if you are an organization, if you want to have IPv4 address space for your own use, and you are not an LIR, then the only option you have is multi-homing. So you have to provide the details of two peering networks. The objective of this policy is, in order to make the policy guidelines simpler, we are proposing to modify the text of section 3.3. I have mentioned here APNIC 124 because which has now become APNIC 127. So section 3 is now section 6. Situation in other IR, ARIN, there is no multi-homing requirement. RIPE, there is no multi-homing requirement. LACNIC, applicant can either have multi-homing requirement or they can just interconnect. APNIC, there is no multi-homing requirement. It's only APNIC which has the strict multi-homing requirement. The proposed solution is organization should be eligible if they are able to justify any one of the following criteria. Currently, they are multi-home, good enough. Currently utilizing minimum of /24 from provider ISP and willing to multi-home in future. Planning to multi-home and enterprise the prefix within 6 months. And the text should be like this. An organization is eligible if it is currently multi-homed or currently utilizing provider's ISP assignment of at least /24 and intends to be multi-homed or intends to be multi-homed and advertise the prefix within 6 months. Organization requesting a delegation under these terms must demonstrate they are able to use 25% of the requested address immediately and 50% within 1 year. The last paragraph is taken from the existing policy. Advantages simplifies the process of applying for IPv4 address space for small delegations and delays the immediate requirement for multi-homing as determined to be appropriate within the time frame. Disadvantages, there is no known disadvantages to us. Impact, there won't be any impact to the existing resource holders. And that's it. Any questions, please?
Thank you, Aftab. Can you go back to proposed text? Oh, then let me ask one question. Why, what is your intention to distinguish different second and third criteria?
The currently utilizing provider assignment of at least /24 and intends to be multi-homed. This one and the third one, this is what you're saying?
Oh, because second one says intends to be multi-homed, but it's still is talking about the future. Then third one said within 6 months is, so you're limited strict timeline.
Yes, well, the strict timelines are already placed in the current policy, so there was no objection in that one. Anyway, so intends to be multi-homed, I'm talking about the third one. Let's say you are a new organization, you want to start something from the basics. You are not utilizing /24 up till, because nobody is going to provide you up till /24 address space, no ISP is going to give you, or if they will, they're going to charge you heaps of money for that. But if you are a new organization, you want to start something new, and you are not utilizing any IP address space from current ISPs, then you have to show the intentions only, because you don't have anything, you don't have any current V4 address space to prove that you have this infrastructure ready. Then you have to advertise the prefixes within the 6 months.
Understood. So comments or questions?
Hello, Shiva Upadhyay. I would like to ask again the same question. If you are putting the criteria like by 6 months or 25% of the utilization in a year or something, but you still not able to, why you are putting these criteria? If maybe they will propose that they will, I can draw a diagram likewise, I will provide, I will use these resources in 6 months. I will provide you, easily can provide you. So how accountability is increasing by putting these lines? I'm unable to understand still.
Yep, I got your point. As I said before, APNIC has to take the role of policing, which is not mandated by the bigger community, and it is not the responsibility of the RIR. Everything is trust-based. And the reason why we are doing this, as I said, just to make sure that things are simple and not too complicated that we have to give false information. Yes, there is no binding. If I don't want to advertise it in next 3 years, and if I keep on paying the APNIC registration fees, that's it. There is no obligation for me to advertise it as per the policy. Again, it will remain a trust-based thing, but it will just simplify and give more room for those people who want to give correct information.
I really appreciate the way of working of APNIC and even NIR level, but we have to think, I guess it's my suggestion to the community in that way, to stop at least those people. It's good we are supporting the even likewise new entrepreneurs or young entrepreneurs to grow their businesses in the network industry, but it also there's also other side of the coin we have to look into. That's it.
Yes, I understand your point, and I appreciate your concern, but that's how it is.
AJ.
Yeah, Ajay Kumar from IRIN. Thank you, Aftab, for giving the many options. But I want to understand the third option. For third option, organization has to give the peering contact, AS number details, or just say that we are going to multi-home and we will use these IP addresses within 6 months.
Since the first policy has already been approved, so when you apply for the resources, you don't have to give 2 peering information, but yes, you have to give at least 1 peering information. If you are planning to get onto the internet with the prefixes you will get eventually, then yes, you must have done some paperwork, you must have done some evaluation with your upstream providers somewhere, at least one at least. So you should be able to get that information here.
Thank you, Aftab. I support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know your name, but please go ahead.
I am Adil Sadiq, a student fellow from Pakistan. I do support this proposal, but I have a suggestion. We already know that most of the IPv4 space has been run out. So instead of spending the resources on eligibility criteria for new IPv4 address allocation, why not draft some proposal about the regulation of already allocated ones? Today, I found 2 presentations that only 1/3 of IPv4 addresses have been routed and 2/3 have not, only for the case of APNIC, Asia region. And similarly, so now what I want to propose is that you should regulate the IPv4 addresses that are already allocated. Why not propose a draft for that one? Why only for the new ones? Thank you.
It's a complicated thing. As I said, it's about changing the role of RIRs. It's about wearing another cap, which is of policing, which is not the intended role of RIRs. We haven't done anything with the bogus routes in the routing table for a couple of decades now. So yes, you cannot police everything. You have to rely on trust-based things. And yes, that's how it is. You can make things simple. You can make things easy for those who wants to run their businesses and make internet a better place. But yeah, you have to live with it.
Is there any other comments? Oh. AJ, you're very barber today. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matasu. This is regarding the comment of my gentleman friend from Pakistan. Here, as a community, I agree with his proposal. We should have something for the IP addresses which has been already delegated. I am not saying that we should have policy right now. As a community, we should discuss something, because some IP addresses has been already delegated. They are not in routing table. We are saying that this is public resource, these are public resource. So we should have something. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? So if not, I would like to ask your opinion about this proposal 113. So it's same as previous proposal. You have 5 options. So can you switch to confer? Oh, it's already on Prop 113. Okay, so let me ask you raising your hand. First, if you strongly support this Prop 113, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks. Thank you. If you support this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. If you are neutral for this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. If you oppose to this proposal, please raise your hand now. Okay. If you strongly oppose to this proposal, please raise your hand now. Okay, thank you. So, it's interesting. For this proposal, raising hand and confer shows pretty similar result. So it's very easy to to decide. Okay, so there are no objection for this proposal, and it's still several people are neutral for this proposal, but I think we reached consensus about this proposal. So this proposal has been reached to consensus, and it will be sent to AMM in this afternoon. But thank you very much, Aftab, for proposing this proposal.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much, Co-Chair.
And thank you very much for presenting them remotely.
Yes, again, my apologies. I'll make sure that I'm available in the next meeting because I can see so many sessions going without any questions being asked. So I feel, yeah, I should be there. And I would like to congratulate Suman Ahmed Sabir for being the co-chair. Congratulations, Suman bhai. And thank you everyone for bearing me from all the way from Sydney. Thank you so much.
See you in Auckland.
Definitely. See you, everybody. Bye.
And wow, it's exactly on time. So I'd like to suspend SIG session at this point, and let's resume from 2 p.m. Okay, please enjoy your lunch. Thank you.